Is Deion Sanders going to control where Shedeur Sanders goes in the NFL draft? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I'm your host, Kevin Borber. Today's episode, it's brought to you by Nissan, the 2025 All-New Nissan Armada. Stay with us if the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. Joining me today, PFF's Dalton Wasserman. Dalton, I appreciate you for hopping on. We're talking all things draft because that's the biggest thing in the football world right now. And I think there's a lot of questions about Shedeur, Deion Sanders. What's going on with all this noise around Shedeur? Are they sprinkling rumors here or there? Let's talk about it because I'll give you my take on it and then I want you to weigh in because you've been around the combine. You sort of know what's going on behind the scenes over there. My take on the whole matter, Deion Sanders probably has 2 or 3 teams that he's okay with Shedeur Sanders going to. With that being said, some of these rumors, I don't know about the quarterback coach one, that one was a little rough, but some of these other rumors of people not seeing him as highly could be some rumors sprinkled in by the Sanders team to get him to a certain landing spot. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because the smoke screens as far as his personality and where Deion might want him to go, it's tough to get a read on all that because you get a lot of people who say, man, he's a great kid and he was so awesome with us and he was nothing but respectful and nice and everything like that. And then you get others who aren't the biggest fans of his personality, right? And I don't think he minds that at all. I think Shedeur, he's had to deal with critics his entire life, right? He's Deion Sanders' son, so that's going to play a factor in it. I don't really think there's as much to this of, manipulating where he wants to go as much as people think. I think what I heard more so at the combine is there's more scouts enamored with Cam Ward than there is necessarily with Shedeur Sanders. And I think that just has to do with, he doesn't have the most elite physical tools, right? Say a guy like a Josh Allen or a Justin Herbert does. So I think there's a greater debate about that, and I think as far as how his game would translate to the NFL level from that standpoint. But I don't think there's as much to manipulating where he wants to go as people think there is.
Interesting. Okay. I feel like it could go either way. I feel like they're either working really hard behind the scenes or, like you said, they're just trusting the process and it's happening to unfold. But I will say, and I want everyone to sort of know this, and Dalton, you can attest to this after the fact if you agree, Deion Sanders' moves, if there are moves to be made in terms of like, hey, we don't want you to draft Shedeur, hey, we don't want this to happen, it's not going to be public, right? It's not going to be loud, right? I think back when Eli Manning didn't want to go to the Chargers, they had issued warning to the Chargers, right? But his family wasn't very boisterous. Granted, there was no social media back then. They weren't boisterous about like, we don't want him to go there. They said what they had to say. They would say it every once in a while. And then when it actually happened, they were like, okay, we told you we don't want this to happen. Now, I don't know if there's going to be an Eli Manning situation this year, but it wouldn't shock me if behind the scenes, Deion Sanders is helping guide Shedeur to maybe impress certain teams, right? The teams that walked away unimpressed with him in those meetings. Was it because of Shedeur's lack of effort or knowledge? I doubt it, right? Shedeur is one of the smarter players. Like you said, he doesn't have the physical tools of a Josh Allen, a Justin Fields, a Lamar Jackson. So he has to thrive somewhere else. So if you're telling me that Shedeur Sanders is, and this isn't Dalton, this is just a hypothetical person out here. If you're telling me that Shedeur Sanders isn't a smart or engaged quarterback, I'm going to have to disagree with you because he has to make it work with other skill sets. So Dalton, if all these Shedeur rumors, what's the one that you believe the least? Let's just go there.
I think the one I believe the least is the one where he comes off as brash or arrogant as opposed to just confident, right? I mean, what made you think that Deion Sanders' son was going to come out of the womb without any confidence, right? So, and he's been his entire college career, he was fantastic. You mentioned it, that processing ability, the timing, the accuracy. He's the FBS's all-time leader in completion percentage, right? He knows what he's doing out there on a football field. And I remember hearing the same from Michael Penix Jr.'s podium last year's his combine, where he goes, my weapon is my processing. Yeah, I don't run like the other guys, or I might not do some of the things that some of the other guys do, say a Jaden Daniels or a Caleb Williams, but mentally, that's where I have to be ahead, right? I have to be efficient mentally and efficient in my footwork and efficient in my accuracy with all of those things from the pocket. And I think Shedeur operates very much in the same way. Now, is there a lot that comes with it? Sure. But to expect that he's not going to have a bigger personality, obviously being Deion Sanders' son is kind of asinine to me. So, I think the part where, if there's a handful of people saying, oh, we just don't like this kid at all. We don't, I just look, do I know him personally? No, but I don't read too much into that. Usually the high character problems, those are publicized well into this process. And we see those guys fall. I don't see Shedeur falling all that far, because I still think beyond all that, he's clearly at least one of the two best quarterbacks in the class.
Yeah. And there's a need for quarterbacks as well. The other point that I wanted to make, because I feel like, so I went down this little rabbit conspiracy hole where it was like, which rumors is his camp starting? Because every year, certain players have enough power, sway to sort of start a rumor to maybe help themselves, hurt themselves, whatever, on purpose. So they follow a certain team. It happens every year, right? We saw it with Laramie Tunsil, the gas mask incident. All of a sudden, that picture, which I'm sure was years old, was surfacing on draft day, right? There's been other examples. The latest sort of thing that I saw at this rabbit hole is the fake or the quarterback coach criticism of him being brash or arrogant or whatever. Some people thought it was fake. Like, it's just like, oh, this is just the Sanders family trying to hype up Shedeur. I see a video of Warren Sapp today going, I'm trying to figure out who that is because we're going to expose him. So I don't think that is the case, but I do think if Deion Sanders has an impact on the draft, and this will conclude this point, we won't know it until the very end, right? Every NFL draft has about a week or two after, and then it goes into the next year where it's like, oh, we really were going to draft this guy. Like my favorite is Patrick Mahomes, right? It seemed like every team was going to draft him. The Saints, the Bears, whoever else, or that was Deshaun Watson, the Bears. But you know what I mean? Where it's like every year there's like 10 stories about the draft of like, we were going to draft him, but this happened. So I think we'll find out in due time, but I do feel like he will have a little bit of an impact, not as much as people think. When we come back, Dalton is going to break down what Shedeur Sanders excels at and why he still views him as one of the better quarterbacks in this draft class. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at Nissan. Now, let me tell you about Nissan because we all need a new whip every once in a while. And the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan, all of the 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. And these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and Clear Team of the Week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games both year. There is no team in college basketball that capably embodies the rugged Armada more than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the second straight season. So when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. That's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure at shopnissan.usa. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Joining me, Dalton from PFF. Dalton, let's talk about it. Someone from your company actually saw Shedeur falling out of the first round. Now, I don't think you share that same sentiment. So let's get people back on the right track here. What do we like about Shedeur? Let's start with that. And where do you see him going in the grand scheme of things?
I think what you like is a fundamentally sound style of play, right? Despite not having maybe an A-plus arm or A-plus mobility, right? He wants to throw with timing. I know there's been a lot made about his pocket presence and taking a lot of sacks, but I think that's also a product of playing in an offense with a suspect offensive line the last 2 years and one that couldn't run the football. They had no balance, so everything was on his shoulders, and at times he had to make those plays to give the Buffaloes a chance to win games, right? So that's one. Two, the accuracy, right? I think his mechanics are very repeatable. They're very much in tune with, between his lower body and his upper body. And he's always got his front side in the right place, even on the move, to make throws and make them accurately, right? He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks we've seen in college football. Three, decision-making. Last year, I was saying at the draft about Jaden Daniels, he had the lowest turnover-worthy play rate in his career among any Power 5 quarterback that we had seen, okay? Shedeur Sanders went and broke that record after having another outstanding year this year. So I think the biggest thing you get is a fundamentally sound quarterback that processes defenses like an NFL quarterback, right? Is there always more to work on? Absolutely. Could the timing sometimes be better? Sure. Were there times where you could certainly tell he was hit a lot in a game and he was hobbled, his footwork got a little bit off, but at the end of the day, He absolutely wants to throw in rhythm. He can do it very, very accurately. I don't think there's really, for as much has been made about, okay, he doesn't have an A-plus arm, I don't think there's a ton of throws that are necessarily off limits because he's got really nice timing. So I think you're getting a fundamentally sound quarterback. You're not getting, the athletic freak that we get from Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson and those guys, but you still have a guy who I think can come in and run an NFL offense as long as he's protected.
Okay, let's address the concerns, right? I think there's, obviously you hit on some of them, but why are these concerns all of a sudden, they're kind of bumping up Jackson Dart to QB2. They're sort of bumping up this tier of quarterbacks that we all viewed as below Shedeur to now it's like, I heard someone say it's a toss-up between Shedeur and Jackson Dart. So where are these concerns coming from, and what do you think is the cause of these?
I think they're coming from one, again, the first thing that's always going to be looked at is physical tools, right? When you talk about guys being toolsy, Justin Herbert, who's 6'6" with an absolute rifle, right? Or nowadays we're getting the athletic passer, the dual threat guy, more and more prevalent among the elite quarterbacks, right? You think about Patrick Mahomes can really run. Josh Allen's a dual threat freak. Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts just won a Super Bowl, and the legs are a big part of his game. Shedeur is not necessarily like that. He's a little closer to an old school pocket passer, maybe even something along the lines athletically of a Joe Burrow, right? Somewhere in that mix, but Burrow's still an elite guy too. It can still work as long as you can process defenses at an elite level. That'll be the question. If he can take that from a good level to an elite one, he could be really, really good. But it's maybe the lack. I get it. And we saw him make plays improvising at Colorado at times, right? He's going to improvise to throw. Maybe he's not going to run away from these freak defensive ends all the time like Lamar Jackson does. But that's the part where you go, okay, it's a little more old school, and pass protection, really, really top-notch pass protection could be a requirement for him, right? When you think about, I even think about a guy now, he's older, but a Matthew Stafford, where on the days he's not protected, there's not a whole lot of other answers, right? So within structure and within the scope of he's protected and has the space to make those throws, he can be really good, but there's not as many answers when it comes to improvising as there is with, say, a Josh Allen, a Mahomes, or a Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I think to add to that, there's also this sense of he didn't throw at the combine, and I thought that was a great decision by him. Simply, you look what happened to Will Howard. Obviously, very different prospects. Will Howard was never in discussion to be a QB1 or even a first-round pick, but Will Howard goes out there, struggles, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this guy sucks, right? That's the notion. It's like everyone's like, oh my gosh, this guy, disaster class. And like a month and a half ago, he was winning a title, right? He was playing football at a level that I don't think anyone had seen out of Will Howard. Let's just be honest. Like Will Howard was hitting a new high of career levels, if you will. So Shedeur, it's been a while since we've seen him play. I also think, and this is the interesting part of mock draft season and NFL personnel, people get sensitive, right? People were upset about Shedeur going to the East-West Shrine Bowl and not participating in anything. They thought he was going to at least do drills. I was there. There was a little bit of like, would have liked to see him, right? I think a lot of people take things personally. Same thing with the combine. Obviously, him or Cam Ward didn't throw either, but it's like, okay, this guy thinks he's too good, and so now we're going to start being like, we don't like him, and he's brash, and he's this, and he's that. I think it's just been a while since we've seen Shedeur, so I also feel like there's a personal aspect to some of his fallings in mock drafts. If you had to guess, and I'll give you where I think he's going to go. I think the lowest he goes, and I'll give you a range. Highest he goes is probably 2. I think it's Cam Ward's spot to lose at 1, and if he does lose it, it'll be to Abdul Carter. That's at least my opinion. And then I think if Shedeur falls, quote unquote falls, I think the lowest he'll go is the top 12. What do you say about that?
I think 7 with the Jets is certainly in play if he's sitting there, especially if they don't have to trade up. And then I'd be curious to see if there's any teams willing to trade up, right? I think about the Pittsburgh Steelers sitting there, I believe, at 21, right? Or even if he falls any further than the top 12, I got to think there's somebody early in the second round, even if there's the Raiders and the Jets trading up again from, somewhere there in the 30s to get into the 20s. I don't think he would get any lower than that. I don't see him getting out of the first round, but I think, look, when you're looking at even if they sign a veteran, right? Let's say the Raiders at number 6, Russell Wilson on a 1 or 2 year deal. Why not have Shedeur go there? Why not take him anyway and see if you can groom him and get a long-term vision going in the same way that, the Falcons tried to with Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix, right? Or the Jets at 7, if they feel good enough about Shedeur, because we heard the rumor too that, a top 7 team doesn't like him that much, and it felt oddly specific. But again, it could be the smokescreen to get him to fall there. We don't know. So there's so much even at the combine that's all about rumors and speculation. And I think quarterbacks more than any other position trust the tape. Just trust the tape. Trust what you see, because there's so many intangible things and so many things that it comes from reacting and reading defenses that it comes from. That, to me, honestly, even you mentioned Will Howard on the downside of it. You don't learn a ton with guys throwing on air. You really don't. I think you might learn more about the receivers and the other guys like that. Or even when I was down at the Senior Bowl watching one-on-ones, there wasn't a ton to learn about the quarterbacks down there unless somebody goes and absolutely lights up every single throw. But trust the tape, and the tape tells me that, honestly, I think he should go in the top 7 or 8 picks in this draft.
Yeah, I like the point that you made, because top 7 was a weird range. Like it's like top 5, top 10, and all of a sudden there's a report that they're like, it's a top 7 team. It's like, okay, well that feels oddly specific. But yeah, I felt the same way about learning about players in these all-star game experiences, because it's like I was at the Shrine Bowl. It's like you can't learn much from the receivers, because it's like sometimes when you're doing one-on-ones, the corners know there's 5 routes they're going to run. Most of the time they're running a post or whatever, right? They don't get too creative, and it's one-on-one. So either way, the corner's out there on an island. The quarterback has unlimited time. And 2, the quarterbacks, it's like you're throwing to guys you don't know. So that was like another reason where I was like, yeah, Shedeur doesn't gain anything from throwing at the combine. I do think he lost a little bit of momentum just because we haven't seen him in a while, but we'll see him at the Big 12 Pro Day, so that should gain some of that back. Speaking of the Big 12 Pro Day, there's going to be 2 receivers specifically that stand out to me that are going to be there, Jimmy Horn and LaJohntway Wester. Let's talk about them when we come back. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. Appreciate you guys for tuning in every single day, making me your first listen of the day. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow so you don't miss out on a moment of our coverage. Dalton, let's talk about it. LaJohntway, Jimmy. Those were 2 names, specifically LaJohntway's, at the East-West Shrine Bowl that teams really liked. Right? They're both fast. They both make plays in open space. But obviously they're not first-round picks, or at least that'd be quite a surprise, I think, to 99% of people. So talk about what NFL teams are getting in them and what you sort of like about their game.
Yeah, so I think you have 2 very similar players in undersized guys who I think one of the things that's going to help both of them is the fact that they have plenty of returning experience as well. LaJohntway with the punt returns, Jimmy Horn with the kick returns. But, I'll start with LaJohntway because I've watched him for a long time. I'm a little biased towards him because I'm an FAU alum, and Colorado getting him from FAU, he's one of the guys I was really rooting for to succeed. And he had a great year, especially the Hail Mary against Baylor. Still quite a moment, isn't it? But no, LaJohntway, you know what he is for a guy his size? He's so darn competitive too. It's like he's got better contested catch numbers than you would think for a guy that size. I think he's a really good route runner. He's not necessarily, I think, what was it? He ran a 4.46, I think it was.
Yeah,
so maybe not
4.48.
Maybe not A+ speed, but a pretty darn good speed. Again, the punt returning thing helps. And I think he's somebody, obviously, as a slot-only weapon who could help a team as a late-round option. I think he makes a roster based on his punt return ability, and he can work his way into that slot role. I think competitiveness and route running are the 2 big things, along with his contested catch ability. Jimmy Horn, I think, is more of a straight-line burner when you look at his style of play. I think LaJohntway's a better route runner, but Horn, I think, can make a roster as a kick returner and then maybe work his way into being more of a vertical threat. He's got a little more experience on the outside. I think in the NFL probably works in a little bit better in the slot because he's undersized as well. Not quite as small as LaJohntway, but probably still works in the slot. So if you want that real infusion of straight line speed, you take Jimmy, and if you want a better route runner in the slot, maybe a punt returner, you take LaJohntway. I do think both of them have a late round shot to be drafted, but their experience on special teams is really going to help them with that.
Yeah, I think the thing with LaJohntway that stood out, I got to interview him at the Shrine Bowl, and nicest guy I've ever met, honestly. Of all the athletes, coaches I've ever met, nicest person I've ever talked to. It was just like a pleasant experience. Usually, or not usually, but there's times when you talk to athletes and it's like they'll do it because they are feeling nice that day. But at the same time, once it's over, they're like, okay, thank you, I'm done, I'm leaving. Like he was just pleasant to talk to, and I enjoyed getting to know him a little bit. I also love his competitiveness. There was one answer that he gave at the combine that if I'm an NFL team, I'm circling, highlighting, marking, putting stickers on it, because he was asked why he transferred or what it was like to be the guy at FAU and then sort of a role player at Colorado. And he said he wanted to show teams that he could be not the main guy and still produce. And like, that was just a perfect answer, at least in my opinion, right? Because like at the end of the day, most of these guys are coming from college programs where they are the guy or one of the guys. You get to the NFL, like you said, they're going to have to carve out a role in special teams. And then from special teams, maybe they get into that wide receivers 4 or 3 spot. Like, it's not just going to go, okay, LaJohntway, you're our wide receiver 1. Congratulations. Like, I'm sure he has the ability to work his way there one day, but it's not going to happen overnight. So really liked getting to know LaJohntway. And then Jimmy, and I feel like you could probably attest to this as well. His 40 time, I don't remember exactly what it was. It was in a 4.4s. I thought he'd be faster, but DeIon Sanders Jr. made a nice point that 40-yard dash speed isn't the same as in-game speed. And so some guys specifically train for the 40-yard dash because you change their technique a little bit so that way you can shave off a second or like a point, whatever, 0.1 of a second. What do you think? Like, do you think their teams are going to read too much into those combine results? And what do you think they could show at their pro day to sort of elevate their level?
I don't think so, because there is a difference between game speed and just 40-yard speed like that. You mentioned it. It's really more of a track kind of thing than it is a football thing, right? It's rare, too, that you get to just open it up 40 yards at a time like that from a dead stop. So I do think, Jimmy, you can tell he's got straight-line game speed, right? You can see it in kick returning. You can see it on the deeper routes and when he gets in the open field. As far as LaJohntway goes, I really like what he said there. You just mentioned it about having to be a role player, right? Because at FAU – I can tell you right now, for 2 years, he carried the offense. He was all they had, right? And there's so many of those group of 5 guys and even FCS guys that you go, okay, wow, he put up all these numbers and 1,500 yards and 20 touchdowns and all that. And you go, okay, is it real? Now, there's certain guys you can tell it's real. Take an Ashton Ginty from Boise State. You have no issue there because you even saw him tear up Power 5 teams that he played. But LaJohntway going into Colorado with Jimmy already there, with Will Shepherd transferring in from the SEC, with obviously Travis Hunter there on the outside, you could argue at the beginning of the year, LaJohntway was really like their 4th receiver and kind of working his way in, and he was just kind of the other guy in the slot. And I felt like by the end of the year, he was the 2nd best player among that group, right? So not only earning a role, but then kind of promoting himself within that role by playing a big part in big moments, especially. So I think for a guy like that to have that experience and to be self-aware enough to know that he went through that process, it's going to be the same thing in the NFL. He's going to enter an NFL team as a late-round pick or maybe a UDFA as the 5th or 6th option. Is he willing to work up and through that? And I think he kind of did that, at least in one season, kind of working up the ladder at Colorado.
Yeah, there's all these like little life lessons we could take from every single moment. It'll be exciting to see where all these Colorado players end up. Dalton, I appreciate you for hopping on the show. Tell the people what you're working on and where they can find you in this busy draft season.
Of course, all over the PFF NFL show on YouTube, the PFF college football show on YouTube. We got great draft content on both. If you're on the college football side, we're also getting ready, previewing some of next year's content as well when it comes to college football playoff. And we're going to get our team previews going for every single Power 5 team as well, including Colorado. So stay tuned on both channels. We've got a ton working right now.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in the football world, so make sure to check out PFF and make sure to check us out over here on Locked On Buffs. I will see all of you guys on Monday.